The problem of the modern world is that the physical sciences have advanced far ahead and created weapons of mass destruction. But what about the social sciences? But when it comes to the interaction of people or groups of people, they haven't found ways to resolve conflicts other than hitting each other over the head with a brick. But now we're not using bricks anymore, we're using atomic, biological, and chemical weapons. And if we get carried away, we could easily make our planet uninhabitable. Moving forward as before and hoping that a catastrophe won't happen in our lifetime is nice, but for someone else's lifetime, you won't have to wait long. Maybe our children or grandchildren, that's the most. It will definitely happen unless we find some other way of coexistence. Experience. There is none in what works, yes, only in what doesn't work. But nevertheless, let's start figuring things out, beginning with the pressing issues. Tension between China and the United States is rising, and our State Department has issued a warning making it clear that China is preparing for conflict. We don't know how far or to what extent the Celestial Empire is willing to go. For now, it's unclear to us. China's fair play. For decades now, China has been pushing competitors out of the semiconductor market. I'm referring to a specific market. They do this with many products, but let's focus on one case. They are using increasingly aggressive tactics and violating all the norms of market economy in order to become, let's say, the dominant supplier in each individual sector. Well, they've chosen several sectors and they're trying to do something there. These actions have led to a trade imbalance and caused serious damage to the economy, let's say, of the United States of America. Not only there, but we're talking about America right now. The United States filed a complaint against China with the World Trade Organization, to which China responded that the United States is illegally using customs tariffs, and they are forced to respond. Well, basically, it's like saying, you're even worse, or you're not good either, over there. World Bank consultant Katie Zacharia worked in China and is very familiar with China's economy and, in fact, with the country's leaders. So let's listen to what she has to say to us.
It seems that President Trump is very effectively trying to stabilize the market, establish negotiations with Beijing, allow companies to bring manufacturing back to the country, and rebuild the semiconductor industry. And what he is doing with Xi Jinping is this. There is a threat of tariff increases in June 2027, but there is also a period for negotiations and this adjustment. In addition to that, President Trump made an amazing deal with Macron for $200 billion for research and development for our own semiconductor industries in Virginia, Idaho, and New York. And so it seems like this is a kind of defensive and offensive tactic since Beijing has dominated the market for so long and enjoyed it. But this came at a huge cost for American companies. So President Trump will take advantage of this and hopefully make a great deal between him and Xi Jinping on semiconductors.
What from this? It's clear that Trump is negotiating the construction of 3 semiconductor plants in the United States. In addition, a deal with Macron is underway, which means that besides the deal with Macron, the construction of 2 more factories is also underway. But all of this is not a quick process. So these first chips will start being produced in industrial quantities in 2026. But real mass production will go from 2027 to 2030. That means by the beginning of 2030, the United States will be able to cover 50% of its needs. Maybe it will take another year or 2 thanks to its own production, so another 5 years in its own production. Plus, there's what they call imports from friendly countries, and it will be able to meet the United States demand in this category of defense-critical products, and these are defense-critical products. So don't expect it to happen quickly. It's a window of opportunity. China knows that its leverage is decreasing every day. Well, for now, no, but generally speaking, after half a year or a year, we're getting closer and closer, and we're producing more and more of these very semiconductors. If right now the United States simply can't survive without Chinese supplies, By 2030, the military industry will become independent from China, meaning that's the window of opportunity for China. If they're planning to do something and restrain us so we don't interfere with them too much right now, and we still haven't learned, gentlemen, to solve problems peacefully.
So the Pentagon is sounding the alarm in its annual report to Congress about the development of the security situation in China. This was written by the Ministry of War. China's main military strategy is directly aimed at defeating the United States through nationwide mobilization, which Beijing calls a national total war. China's historic military buildup has made United States territory increasingly vulnerable. China has a large and growing arsenal of nuclear, naval, conventional, long-range, cyber, and space capabilities that can directly threaten American security. I'd like your opinion since there was an in-depth analysis of this topic in the magazine this morning. Can Trump's fleet compete with China's? And maybe we're talking about the Taiwan issue, and that's one problem, and I know that. The Department of Defense has warned a strike on Taiwan could occur, possibly this year or in 2027. But you see, the president is really moving to at least bring the United States Navy ships into a new era, into a new century. Maybe because of the Chinese threat. What do you say to that?
I completely agree. It's no coincidence President Trump launched the Golden Fleet or Trump Fleet just before this Pentagon report. Especially emphasizing China's naval capabilities, China not only possesses this growing arsenal of maritime assets, but they are able to combine military and civilian resources, and China has the capacity to produce them. I said that's 232 times more than the United States' total military and civilian vessels. So President Trump absolutely agrees, and the United States needs to get ahead and start competing with China. Because China hasn't stopped for decades. While the United States slowed down the pace of building our naval ships and essentially expanding our military, China
doubled down?
Tripled, exponentially increased its military capabilities. So the Pentagon report, especially after living in China for 3 years, really worried me. And I'm so grateful that President Trump is ahead of much of this. And I hope and pray that this will be a bipartisan effort from both Democrats and Republicans to truly support him and strengthen our armed forces. That's Cheryl.
Regarding China, the United States has another important mission or important task. Not to let China's 1.5 billion population settle on 1/6 of the world's landmass. That is, in one way or another, to merge with Russia is the first task of the Trump administration. So it seems the end of the war in Ukraine and then involving Russia in the life of the West, that is, separating it from the global South and Asia. And Europe is actively interfering with this process, just constantly interfering at every turn. Although they, so to speak, perfectly understand what America is doing and why, Euro leaders don't even try to hide their intention, not to reduce or end, but to escalate the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. That even Zakharova, you know who she is, has started calling them hawks.
The Western European backers of the Kiev regime, mainly from the European Union and United Kingdom,
aren't thinking about any kind of peace at all. They're only thinking about the money they supposedly send to the Kiev regime and then expect to get back. But not in the form of officially allocated funds, but rather as part of this highly corrupt scheme. The so-called interest-free loan for Ukraine in the amount of 90 billion euros was approved. As French President Macron stated, this loan is intended to finance, and I quote verbatim, Kiev's military efforts from 2026 to 2027. Well, that's what you thought, isn't it? Very enlightened, Cyril, and I put that word in quotation marks. Europe, which constantly declares its commitment to peace in Ishtitska and the need for a peaceful settlement. Take those 90 billion euros and invest them in Ukraine's economic development programs. Yes, of course, even though they themselves are Ukrainians, they destroyed Ukrainian statehood. But no, this is actually not at all part of the European Union's plans. That's exactly what the top Brussels bureaucracy wants. They need a bloody massacre. According to him, Ukraine will only pay off its debt if Russia pays so-called reparations.
There's some truth and some lies here, but the fact is that Europe doesn't want peace, but rather wants to drag Russia into this for a very long time, and thus not give the Kremlin a chance to advance further west. Or they want to get personal returns from their investments in the war in Ukraine, instead of, as Zakharova says, investing that money in the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Extremely harmful and even malicious attempts by a group of states, primarily those very Western European ones, to torpedo these efforts and completely undermine all the diplomatic successes achieved. In our ongoing discussions with the American administration, we consistently urge our colleagues to actively counteract this destructive process. For our part, we remain ready to continue our work within the frameworks established at the highest level. In Anchorage, we've always welcomed cooperation, partnership, and friendship. The only condition we had was that international law must be strictly observed, and this includes absolutely everything, both the laws themselves and morality.
Who attacked whom? What Zakharova completely forgot to mention is that Russia barbarically destroyed half of Ukraine, killing, well, about 500,000 of the country's residents and costing 1 million Russian lives. Even during invasions, people fight each other, as they've done there for at least 5,000 years. You can do it, well, by fighting the military, targeting military facilities. Or you can completely forget about morality, human dignity, compassion, and drop bombs on kindergartens. Well, of course, you have to blame someone else for your crimes, like a thief shouting, "Stop thief," pointing the finger at someone else.
Today, we are literally witnessing a complete disregard for the rule of law in the Caribbean Sea, where it seems that long-forgotten methods of illegally seizing assets rightfully belonging to other countries are being revived, namely piracy, raiding, and outright banditry. International maritime law considers this civil behavior a violation of navigation freedom, as outlined in Article 87 of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We unequivocally condemn such incidents and call for stability, legality, and order in the maritime sphere. I confirm that the Russian embassy in Caracas and Russian specialists in Venezuela are operating normally.
China did not like being kicked out of Panama, losing a small prize gift called the Panama Canal, which they did not build, but very conveniently took control of. The leadership of Panama. They didn't like that the United States warned Denmark not to make deals with China regarding Greenland. They don't like what the United States is doing in Ukraine. But what upsets China the most is the United States policy of pushing China out of Latin America.
Pause and check the map. Major world powers are clashing. At sea, a massive oil tanker carries nearly 2 million barrels of crude oil. At that moment, United States forces moved in. Washington seizes a Venezuelan oil tanker that was headed straight to China without warning shots for the headlines, no quiet diplomacy. This is a full interception, a public announcement, and a worldwide shock. Let's explore what happened. So, the United States intercepted and seized a Venezuelan oil tanker carrying about 1.8 million barrels of crude oil. The destination was China. According to Washington, this was an unusual trade. The United States claims that this vessel was part of Venezuela's shadow fleet, essentially a network of tankers used to bypass United States sanctions. By hiding owners, changing flags, and quietly shipping oil across oceans. But this is serious. Why? Because this didn't happen right off the coast of Venezuela. It wasn't a port seizure. It happened in open waters. And that changes absolutely everything, because right now trade routes are under threat and energy security is being put to the test. The rivalry between great powers is now public knowledge. After that, China responded, and it was very sharp, loud, and dangerous. Of course, Beijing is angry. China called the United States' actions illegal piracy, unlawful interference, and a clear violation of international law. China states that the oil was acquired legally and that the United States has no right to block a sovereign energy deal. This is not diplomatic language, this is a direct warning, and for China, believe me, this is very important. China is an economic lifeline for Venezuela. Venezuela needs buyers, China needs cheap oil, and United States sanctions are pushing them toward each other. For Beijing, this is not just a matter of questions, it's about energy security, trade independence, and countering United States control over global sea routes.
China is profiting well from Western sanctions. As soon as producers have one client and many offers, the client chooses what's more convenient, what's cheaper. And here, the United States says in international waters, we're just enforcing, so to speak, the sanctions we've imposed. We're not just announcing them, we're actually carrying them out. And the Chinese profit margin dropped.
Trump, he's very determined right now. Sanctions will be strictly enforced and there will be no gray areas. So the main question is, will China back down? Analysts are wondering if China will increase its naval escort for oil shipments, if Beijing will challenge United States authorities at sea, and whether Chinese ships might start pushing back. Countermeasures don't always have to be missiles, right? It could be trade pressure, diplomatic escort, escalation, or military positioning in another region.
The United States is trying to balance trade with China and with the world, of course, and they're trying to end wars. The United States is trying to stop terrorists from being supplied with money and weapons. The United States is trying to stop the flow of drugs that kill about 100,000 Americans a year, by the way. And there are, players, countries, people, companies who make huge fortunes from this, and the United States gets in their way.
And yes, Russia is also watching this closely. Moscow is already politically supporting Caracas. But now, can Russia send its navy? Could joint exercises become more frequent? Could Venezuela become another arena for a proxy war? If Russia intervenes, this will no longer be a story about the United States and Venezuela. It will become global.
And again, the knot is tied around the confrontation between China, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, and that part of the world we call the rule of law state of Western civilization and humanitarian values. But actually what? Now,
in 2025, the tension
between the United States and China has reached a level unseen since the Cold War. China displayed its strength by unveiling new ships and holding Navy and Air Force exercises. They sometimes even intruded into the supposedly protected airspace of Taiwan. In 2024, China made over 3,600 military incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Meanwhile, the United States responded with political measures such as reducing trade and even demonstrated its own military capabilities, including surfacing a submarine at the end of September. Its partnerships with Japan, South Korea, and Australia were all aimed at strengthening defense to anticipate a potential conflict. China is widely known to view the United States as a primary rival and geopolitical adversary. And although neither country has made direct statements ruling out a direct military conflict, diplomatic tensions and channels between them have cooled, and they are unpredictable. Unlike the carefully managed rivalry of the past, today's military strategy operates under compressed decision-making, instant global communication, and military technologies that require lightning-fast responses. A single mistake from either side is enough to spark a war that could easily become global. But what would that mistake look like? Here are 5 military scenarios that could escalate the current standoff into real conflict.
experts are discussing who, why, and how a war between the United States and China could start. I got curious about this, so I decided to show it to you.
Scenario 1. Tensions in the South China Sea are turning deadly. It's now the world's most dangerous maritime area, where coast guards armed with water cannons face off daily. The true reason for this conflict is relatively simple. Kitai claims sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea, using its infamous 9-dash line. This line is rejected by international law and neighboring countries, but it does not assert sovereignty. It is enforced by a growing presence of Coast Guard vessels, maritime militia, and naval escorts. The United States routinely conducts freedom of navigation operations, sending destroyers into waters China claims as its own. Meanwhile, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and other United States allies face harassment of fishing vessels, threats to maritime resources, and ongoing challenges to sovereignty. The start of a conflict could be something as harmless as a routine expedition gone wrong. For example, there's the Philippine resupply mission to troops stationed on the Sierra Madre, a deliberately grounded World War II-era ship serving as Manila's outpost on the Second Thomas Shoal. Chinese Coast Guard vessels move in to block the route as they've done before, but this time the blocking maneuver doesn't go as planned. The water cannon from a Chinese boat accidentally or even deliberately disables the steering of the Philippine vessel, leaving it out of control. The incident is broadcast live worldwide within minutes. The Philippine government, facing internal pressure and bound by a mutual defense treaty with the United States, immediately calls for assistance. American forces in the region are sent to the incident scene. What makes this scenario so dangerous is the sheer density of forces operating in close proximity on any given day. You may encounter Chinese Coast Guard boats, fishing vessels, and militias disguised as military ships. People's Liberation Army Navy destroyers, American guided missile destroyers, Philippine patrol boats, and Vietnamese Coast Guard ships, all operating in the same disputed waters.
So scenario number one is too many ships crowded together with nervous captains.
Taiwan is the most likely target for a deliberate conflict crisis. As mentioned, China is actively trying to intimidate Taiwan into playing by its rules. For Beijing, reunifying with Taiwan is central to Xi Jinping's vision about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049, which is practically accepted as the common Chinese dream or the dream of the Communist Party of China. This is viewed as the last step to overcome past humiliations and make China Asia's leading power. The island is located at a key point of the first island chain, which restrains China from accessing the open Pacific Ocean. But more important is its semiconductor industry, which produces about 90% of the world's most advanced chips and serves as the technological foundation for modern armies, AI systems, and digital economies. China has long failed to acquire this technology. China taking Taiwan would shift Asia's power balance and could end United States' influence in the Indo-Pacific. By 2026, Beijing may realize time is running out as Taiwan's separate identity grows, supported by defense imports from the United States and allies. In recent years, American arms sales have included advanced anti-ship missiles, drones, and air defense systems. And most of them will start arriving by 2027. China is unlikely to start with a full-scale invasion. It would be too costly, too risky, and doomed to fail given Taiwan's geographic advantages and defensive readiness. Instead, Beijing is launching a campaign of coercion, a gradual escalation designed to strangle Taiwan into submission. It starts with large-scale undeclared exercises that never end. People's Liberation Army Navy ships establish a loose cordon around Taiwan, not a full blockade, but enough to make shipping companies nervous. Insurance rates for ships and crews skyrocket, making the rules meaningless. Chinese Coast Guard vessels inspect commercial ships approaching Taiwan, citing new safety regulations in waters that China claims as its own. At the same time, China is carrying out sophisticated cyber attacks against Taiwan's critical infrastructure, targeting power grids, banking systems, communications networks, and the semiconductor industry. This results in a blockade causing Taiwan to lose sovereignty and income, ultimately impacting the United States and its allies. This disrupts trade and vital technological research. The United States still formally supports Taiwan.
Taiwan, of course, is one of the main opportunities for conflict, one of the main triggers, as people say today, and the United States will not abandon it. By the number on the Musea safe and the Facebook workers' representation, this is not about development, health, or a proper list. Let's talk about what we know. Representatives of China telling stories for weeks. Lightweight on Lock1.com, internal networks.
The fishing dispute around the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands is escalating into a conflict. The Senkaku Islands, called Diaoyu Dao in China, are 5 uninhabited rocks with a total area of only 2.7 square miles in the East China Sea. No one lives there full-time, and the land lacks strategic resources. Japan administers the islands and considers them undisputed Japanese territory. China claims they are historically Chinese, and the islands fall under Article 5 of the United States-Japan Security Treaty, which means that an attack on them is considered an attack on Japan itself, requiring an American military response. but the islands have some resources that are vital for both China and Japan. Control over the islands directly extends to control over the surrounding sea through exclusive economic zone agreements. This allows vessels to legally fish in the area. In this case, the islands have potential undeveloped oil reserves. And both China and Japan could benefit greatly if they could use these resources without facing territorial claims. Unlike the South China Sea, where clashes are likely to involve Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia, the Senkaku scenario is more dangerous because the main participants are more professional and can inflict serious damage in the first hours of a conflict. And Japanese Coast Guard vessels are powerful, well-trained, and rely on one of the most advanced fleets in the world. Chinese law enforcement vessels in the area are getting larger, better armed, and backed by Navy destroyers. All it takes to start a conflict is the peak of the fishing season or a dispute over monitoring or resource extraction. The Japanese Coast Guard patrols to stop Chinese vessels from entering its exclusive economic zone, which Tokyo claims as its own. Chinese border patrol boats escort fishing vessels to protect resources. China has asserted its rights. If something goes wrong on either side, they will most likely immediately turn to the military for help, which will again lead to chaos and an escalation of military maneuvers to secure this territory. The Japanese government, facing strong domestic pressure, may protest and warn that interference in its economic or military operations in its controlled seas will be met with force. China will refuse to back down, as it has countless times during previous regional crises. The argument over who is to blame becomes secondary to the standoff developing around the ships involved in the conflict. From this point on, a single accidental warning shot is enough. Perhaps China will mistakenly launch a missile when it meant to fire a flare or turn on a water cannon. Perhaps Japan will decide to bring too many ships and make China believe that an offensive has already begun. In any case, the result could be a conflict between the two forces gathered around the merchant ships. Because the United States has mutual defense treaties with China, they are essentially obligated to join.
It's interesting how an unimportant and insignificant pile of rocks, a heap of stones, could become the cause of World War III. Well, that's enough, so to speak. There are still a few possibilities, but that's enough, as they say. What this really shows us is that the powder keg is already set. The dry gunpowder could explode, and it doesn't matter what sets it off. The important thing is that it could happen. And besides, no one in China or the United States wants to die, especially in the hell that is called a nuclear explosion. The situation can easily become irreversible when events start rolling down the hill like a snowball, and the snowball keeps getting bigger. The planet's policeman, the United States, is refusing the role of global policeman and is suggesting that 5 strong countries take on the role of this very policeman in their own regions, the United States in Latin America, China and Russia in their own neighboring areas. It's uncertain if anyone will stop China, Russia, or the United States from dominating smaller countries. And the organization of empires, like the 3 warring countries from Orwell's 1980 book, it's somewhat similar to globalism, but having more than one center is already a good thing. Several centers mean it's no longer a single global center. There's already competition. Yes, and of course the world might not be divided into just 5 parts, but maybe more, because there's also Turkey, there's Brazil. Maybe they'll decide to get involved in this division of the world, or if the Sunnis plus Israel create their own Abraham Accord alliance. In any case, small countries will no longer be able to look for protectors in the regions, yes, and will have to kiss the ring of their big neighbor, who is also their protector from themselves. So either form an alliance of small countries, uniting their armies and foreign policy to become a stronger force. If not a shark, then, well, I don't know, maybe something like a chip of that type, something you can't eat quickly, like a hammerhead fish, for example. Well, I know there are no such fish. I know, yes. But before that, we need to go through the stage of pacifying wars and sorting out trade, and then rebuild the world accordingly. Probably less utopian and less centralized than what collectivists of all kinds and shades are proposing. It seems that soon we will live to see the moment when medicine will stop aging and start regenerating even brain cells that have been softened by years. And at the moment of greatest euphoria, someone who feels left out will pull the string, and the balloon will fly away with all its air, its atmosphere, either toward or away from the sun, and life in the universe will disappear for the next 30, 40 million years. And after that, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I just don't know what will happen, but for us, it won't really matter anymore. Subtitles. So God bless those who are thinking about the future of humanity to come up with and start implementing some kind of plan. At least then, maybe we'll have a chance to survive. Until we meet again.